panelists on stage because the panelists might take some time to wear the mic. So everyone, please, I will give the floor to you to welcome your panelists.
Yep. Let me try this. It works? Okay, well. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And let me invite my panel to the stage. So we have with us today a brilliant lineup of speakers. So we have Nishant Arya, Vice Chairman of the GBM Group. Please join us on the stage. And we have Azreen Idawi Zainal, who is a General Manager for Sustainability at Securities Commission of Malaysia. Please. We have also Maher Al Kaabi, who is advisor to Group Chairman and Independent Board Member at Al Group. And last but not least, we have Anjali Wisokmomonan, who is the Director for Policy at Asia Investor Group on Climate Change. Dear panelists, thank you very much for joining us today. We're very pleased to have you with us. And I would like also to welcome the audience for joining us at the panel session, where we'll be discussing the capacity building for low emission and resilient economies. So let me start from this, that in fact, the transition to low emission development would require like major shift in the economic systems, in policies, in financial sector, and it would require innovative, let's say, approaches and technologies to make the transition happen. And the capacity building becomes in particular instrumental in this. And it's just digital skills are quite needed nowadays. All different jobs, let's say, from procurement manager to fleet manager can be done in more sustainable way if the workforce have the needed skills. And I would like to provide you some data, before we get to the discussion, so you have some understanding, of the background of the issue. So according to the latest LinkedIn report on green skills, the overall penetration of the green skills in the workforce is growing across all the sectors and across all the countries which we studied. So basically, what does it say? That there are people who hold the green jobs or have at least one green skill, and the number is growing. But at the same time, the study finds that the demand for this kind of workforce is much higher than the supply. And according to the LinkedIn findings as well, the hiring rate for the people with the green skills is for 29% is higher than for the general workforce. So we can see here that there is a demand and market supply rule in place, right? And if we go deep in the industries, there is understanding that overall penetration of green skills across different sectors of economy is almost the same, so it stands around 12%. So what does it mean? It means that 1 out of 8 people across all the industries have the green skills. Or let me put it that way, 7 out of 8 actually doesn't have any green skill to perform the job in more sustainable way. And if we look at the financial sector, so the industry actually is lagging behind from all the other sectors. So the penetration in the financial sector is around 6.3%, which means that only 1 out of 15 have the green skills to perform the job sustainably. So what does it mean? It means that basically we don't have enough workforce which can perform the work in a more sustainable way. And actually the study which was done by Financial Centers for Sustainability Network, our friends from FC4S Network, also actually confirms this idea. So according to their assessment, the 50% of all the financial centers say that the lack of capacity is one of the most 3 challenging barriers for development of sustainable finance market. So it means that we need to equip the financial sector. We need to help the policymakers to drive this agenda. We need to provide them knowledge, resources, and tools to make this happen. And with that in mind, we gathered today the brilliant panel with different, various backgrounds to share the knowledge, to share the ideas, how we can actually transform the sectors to make sure that our workforce have the skills needed to perform sustainably to make just transition happen. And to make this more effective, let me start from this. We'll have one general question to each of my panelists, and I would like to ask you to keep your answers to 4 or 5 minutes if possible. So we'll have second round of questions, specific questions for each of you, and we'll have the Q&A session just which was mentioned by Chenglin, hopefully in the end. So first, let me start actually from Nishan, from you. So GBM Group is actually the conglomerate which is worth more than $2 billion. And you act in various industries, including AI, and you are present in 37 countries across the world. So tell us, please, where you're standing from. What kinds of capacity is needed, actually, to make sure that just transition happens? Please, floor is yours.
No, I think first of all, I would like to really congratulate NDB for organizing such a session, because it's at a very opportune time and at the right place we're discussing this. And we at JBM embrace sustainability in every possible manner in all our different businesses. When we look at sustainability and where the industry and different countries are positioned today, I personally feel that it's extremely important to see that the basic fabric of skill is most important, because on one hand, as you rightly mentioned, there's a dearth of people which are required. On the other hand, we need skill sets available. So we are actually focusing on a lot of learning, unlearning, relearning programs for equipping people with such skill sets which are specific to green technologies, whether electric mobility, renewable energy, zero emission technologies, and driven by digitization to ensure that everything is based on data analytics. Another thing which is playing a very critical role here is that the evolving skill sets, not only new skill sets as we go along, and when it is getting coupled with digitization, I think in certain cases people talk about redundancy of manpower, but I feel that it is reigniting the kind of knowledge which we need for these domains. And that's where the ecosystem approach comes in. And at an ecosystem level, if we are looking at the green and the zero emission ecosystems, we are clearly able to see that starting from renewable energy, going up to different forms of green mobility, and infrastructure which is being used by the final user, I think is a very large part of the ecosystem which touches the common man. Almost 90% plus people would use such kind of resources. And the impact of such changes is going to be very important. But for funding such kind of projects, I think the green financing and funding is something which has enhanced substantially, but it's a long way to go for the industry to really see that in every country, every region, every project is getting priority over other projects when it's needing green funding and financing. And I think there's a huge opportunity which lies here where multiple institutions, including different organizations which are committing to such kind of impact investing and green funding, are looking at getting involved with such avenues across the world. So I think creating a right dashboard of such kind of opportunities and such great institutions which are working on such projects across the world, getting them together would be a very good opportunity for collaboration and co-creation in this space. Because I personally feel that at the end of it, it is all about technology driving value. And if we are able to categorically understand technology driving value with collaboration across different regions, then we would be able to crack the puzzle of really understanding the green impact with green financing and the green skills, as you rightly mentioned. And I think that would be the ultimate success which we would look forward to, and being a part of that ecosystem to really contribute and see that how are we able to put our portion and point across clearly, and understanding that it is not a one-time exercise. I think the long-term goal for the next 25 to 30 years, even 50 to 60 years, we are able to clearly see how things are happening on the ground and how we are able to categorically understand the nuances, because it's not a cookie-cutter model. Every country, every region, every project requires different kind of enablers. And I think those enablers can only come across with the right collaboration and co-creation going along. So, and with the fabric of digitization, I think the global economies can really work together, and the exchange of data information really equips each other to understand how real-time information can be used for decision-making in all such cases. And even remote locations can be manned and can be used for addressing the issues which they are facing. And in many areas where the development is going on now, and we are creating new development opportunities, so those development opportunities can be created with a totally green and zero emission based structure. And I think having these different pillars in place would really redefine the cities and the urban infrastructure and the way we are implementing projects, inclusive growth, and coupled with a long-term strategy, I think would be delivering results in such cases. That is how I look at it.
Thank you very much. I liked your point about the ecosystem approach and digital technologies. And it was mentioned earlier that digital approaches actually helps to drive the cost down, right?
Correct.
And that brings us actually to finance part. And in here, actually, I would like to turn to Azreen. So you were with the Securities Commission in Malaysia for nearly 10 years now, right? And you were involved in all the sustainable finance policies in the country and across the ASEAN market. So, and please just correct me if I'm wrong, but you're staying in the intersection of finance and policymaking, right? And from where you are standing, what do you think about the capacities we need, for making the just transition?
First of all, thanks for inviting me for this session. In relation to your question, I think in terms of capacity building is really important. But before I go further to explain about why this is important, I just wanted to quickly share a little bit about the work that we are doing in Malaysia. So for Securities Commission Malaysia, we've been championing sustainable responsible investment, or SRI. Sorry, you can't hear me? Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, better? Right, thanks. Okay, so before I go on to answer your question on capacity building, I just wanted to quickly share on the work that we've been doing in relation to championing sustainable and responsible investment in Malaysia as well as in the region. So for Securities Commission Malaysia, our work on SRI are guided by 5 strategies. The first one is in terms of widening the range of SRI instruments. The second one is building a more diversified issuer base. Third is attracting more investors. Fourth is building an internal governance structure. And the fifth one is in relation to enhancing the information architecture surrounding the ecosystem of sustainable and responsible investment. So across all the 5 strategies, capacity building is critical. So we have in the past and continuously embark on various capacity building programs that covers across the 5 strategies, working with various partners in delivering these programs. In relation to transition, what is key is that the understanding of new technologies. You mentioned earlier about technologies and data. So this is where the financial sector, they really need to understand the technologies, especially the new ones. As we know, the financial sector are very familiar with the traditional sectors. We know services, manufacturing, infrastructure. We know how to structure financial products in order to finance those industries. But in relation to new technologies, there are a lot of things that the financial sector may not know yet. So this is where unfamiliarity may breed contempt. We don't know it, then we shy away from it. If we know it, then we are able to better price the risk and then structure the right financial product for those new technologies and new sectors that are emerging. So just to share a little bit, back in 2015, 2016, Securities Commission Malaysia was tasked to lead. We were tasked to lead an industry working group reporting directly to the Minister of Environment back then, looking at the task force is called Green Finance Task Force. So we were looking at how we can further mobilize finance to finance green projects in Malaysia. So at that point in time, renewable energy was a new sector in Malaysia. A lot of us didn't understand what is renewable energy, how does solar farm works, what sorts of financing is needed to finance renewable energy. So through this task force, it kind of group people together, those from the renewable energy sector, the policymakers, the regulators, the people who are working on the projects, connect them all with the financial sector. So together then we discuss on what is needed to mobilize finance for renewable energy. And since then, there's been a lot of programs that we've done towards this. And this has led to the issuance of the world's first green sukuk in Malaysia for the financing of a solar project. And that was the beginning. But now, the financial sector is familiar already with renewable energy. They know how to structure a sukuk or a bond to finance renewable energy. And the issuances of green sukuk in Malaysia in relation to renewable energy projects are now around 20% of total issuances in the market. The other issuances make up of affordable housing, sustainable agriculture, and other projects. So while RE has become more familiar to us, but there are other new technologies that are emerging. For example, hydrogen, CCUS, just to name a few. So these are new. This is an area that a lot of the financial sectors, we might not know a lot of these things yet. So this is an area that we will continue to engage with the relevant industry players in Malaysia to enhance the understanding of these new technologies, and from there to look at what are the ways to structure the right financial products to finance these things. Earlier I mentioned about the issuance of the green sukuk, the world's first green sukuk in Malaysia. So just to highlight a bit that prior to the issuance, the particular company, they had a tough time in approaching the banks to get financing. They know about, the only source of financing they know was to get the bank loan. But they had a tough time securing a bank loan because the bank didn't understand how to provide loan to renewable energy projects, what sorts of rate to be charged, how to do the due diligence, the risk assessment. So that was a challenge then. And it was quite fortunate at that time that Securities Commission Malaysia and the World Bank Group, we just established a working group that looks into outreach and awareness program, particularly among the renewable energy producers, and how to get them to understand about the bond and sukuk market in Malaysia and what sorts of financing that they can avail themselves through issuing bonds and sukuk in Malaysia. So through continuous engagement with this particular issuer, we then managed to educate them about what are the processes of issuing a green sukuk, what needs to be done, connect them with the bankers, connect them with the external reviewers, and from there, they learned how to do it and they tap into the green sukuk market in Malaysia. And learning from that, we have launched our flagship program. We call it Navigate Green Financing Program. This program is outreach and engagement with businesses to tap into the Malaysian capital market to finance their green and sustainable projects. We have reached out to almost 700 businesses since we launched the program, and this is a program that we will continue doing even next year as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your answer. Actually, it brings me my memories. When we started in Astana in Kazakhstan, like in 2016, working on green finance market, we've been doing the same, actually educating the market, to tap, to get the, to fund the projects and actually to start to understand what is green, right? And before you get to the funding. And you also mentioned Islamic finance, and I'm very happy to turn to our next speaker who has extensive experience in Islamic finance, in board membership, in risk management, in a lot of sectors. And I'm sure you have a lot to share with us, Maher, about your views, about the capacities needed for just transition. Please, floor is yours.
Use my both hands. Thank you for your question. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you for inviting me over here as well. I believe the two keynotes, you've given as well, kind of encompasses everything we talk about capacity building. I'll talk from the overall economy perspective in UAE and what we do. I put in an acronym called HITS. HITS, and there's an F after that. But those who are exercise probably understand what HITS stand for, which is high interval training, but I disappoint you, it's not that what I mean over here. So starting with human capacity building, which is very important, I think echoing back to all what you guys have mentioned is tremendous. Now we live in an environment, particularly in UAE, where you have about 160 to 200 nationalities. So they bring about their own cultures and values. So that makes it even more challenging for you to align their thoughts together when it comes to green economy and environment preservation and so forth. So we're building and working on that. Now, before I dwell into these things and building technical abilities, we keep on talking at our level, which is the adults, which is fantastically and fine. But very few of us are actually going back to the education system and teaching the next generation, because this challenge is here to stay. Actually going to be a longer time. So how do we go back to the education system? And I happen to sit as a chairman of board of schools where we have about 60,000 children locally, internationally, and we're actually inculcating program in coordination with the Ministry of Economy. So one of the things Ministry of Economy has done, they've ran a pilot program. They're running a pilot program as we speak a couple of months ago, where they'll train their trainers, about 2,000 to 3,000 teachers, on their circular economy and environmental preservation. Post that, they will make sure the program is on all the public schools, and they will make it as part of the curriculum. We started ahead of that in my schools, given that I'm trying to guide them and tell them this is something very important to do. It's one of the 5 things that we need to do. If we take a macro picture, globally there are 2 major trends going on in the world. One is the digital economy, second is the circular economy. And the first will actually fuel the development of the green economy and the circular economy, without which it's not going to happen. So we're talking about AI, digital twins, Web3, just name it, metaverse as well. And we personally working in our companies, which I'll do later on, how we're developing our own AI model for the circular economy that we have, and digital twin and so forth for the factors we have. So starting with the edge, it's a human development. How do we make sure we're trying to make alignment, people understand it, and building the technical abilities for people? So that's what the government is trying to do. Going to the I, which is all the institutional capacity building that we need to do, which is your public sectors, which is the government, and public sectors. Now, again, we live in UAE economy, and we've got a beautiful problem where actually government is leading the way and public is trailing back. If you go to the rest of the world, is usually the private sector leads the way and the government actually follows. We have a reverse over here. So you've got every single company in the government is trying to establish a framework for that. So through a ministerial decree, last cabinet, 2022, we established something called Circular Economy Council, which I happen to sit as well over there, which is making sure that we collaborate with all the government sectors, along with the private sectors, when we come up with the policies related to circular economy, green economy. So we're working on 22 policies. All the policies that we're working on, we're not drafting them. We're bringing this, the private subject matter expert and that particular things that we want to recycle, for example, and through a workshop, they develop the policies. So what happens now, because they're driving the policies, when it comes to implementation, is about 80% easy for it to be done when we roll the policies out. And we've witnessed when we rolled out the 5 policies, the adoption and execution has been a larger, strong impact to the environment, because they drafted the policy. Because the objective of the government was not to break the companies, but work with the companies. So within the council, we have government bodies. It's led by Her Excellency Maryam Al-Mehri, she's the Minister of Climate Change and Environment, also led by Minister of Economy, Abdullah bin Togh, and also other ministerial representatives and other government bodies that we have today, and private sector. And of course, the other important pillar is academia, because we want the research to be there on constant basis, which we can feed us for us and make sure what we need to do next. This is when it comes to institutional capacity building, which is the H and the I. T is the technical, which is another challenging thing that I believe, in my humble opinion, is not being done and given importance, in a sense of that we have a lot of KPIs globally what happen, and I think one of you mentioned is how do we make sure that this is applicable to me in the country? So we see all these greenhouse gas emission KPIs that we see in the world, which is fantastically done. A lot of people researched it. However, is it applicable to my region? Is it applicable to my environment? So we need to make sure that we also come up with our own assessment, recheck these technical KPIs that we have today, and also keep on building on them. Because as the environmental changes happen, we need to make sure these yardsticks need to be adjusted automatically. And what will help that? Data. Data is actually going to fuel any technology development. You don't have data, you don't structure it, you don't cube it, you don't put it in a proper way, you will not be able to move forward. I've been working for data and AI for the last 40 years, since I was a child when I was programming, so I know the importance of data and how we were managing trillions of data in the previous organization I was in. The S and the HITS is the societal impact, which has also been alluded to by yourself. if we do not take care of the vulnerable societies and communities, this is not going to happen. We have to make sure we take care of them. And they're immense example of what we're trying to do in the UAE. But I think we are less impacted from that perspective. We're talking about those countries who are impacted when natural disaster happen, when jobs demobilization happen. So luckily in the first day itself, there was a donation of $260 million has been already put in place for those disaster recovery things, but now it's already crossed $460 million. I know it's a drop in the ocean for what's required, but I think over a period of time, this is going to increase. So this concludes all the hits. These are the core things. If we know and remember and work on them, it will happen. Now the F, which I did not mention, and all of you have talked about it, which is finance. Now, again, finance, you need to make sure that you have the right mindset of doing it. So what are we trying to do? I've recommended something in the council that we need to go back and collaborate with central bank. So we can put a certain percentages of funding need to be done on the going basis. It should be to the green economy and provide all the incentives required vis-a-vis whatever we have already discussed in the past as well. So these actually will be the key things that we need to do and we're working on. Last but not the least, as we speak, we're trying to develop a circular economy lab, which we're going to be launching beginning of the next year, where we further enhance the development of circular economy, bring in more participants from the private sector, how do they can collaborate, and they develop the policies for the transition from the linear economy to the circular economy. If I move this whole wire again.
Thank you very much. You made so many points out there, so I just like maybe point one, collaboration between the academia, government, and the private sector. I like that one a lot, and where you build.
Build on collaboration. Living over here and around the world and regionally as well. And this is the message you will see our forefathers and the current presidents is always echoing and actually executing with collaboration. Without it, nothing going to happen.
Yeah, that's true. And the last you said finance, so that's why I want to turn to my last but not least speaker. So we have Anjali, who is representing the Asia Investor Group on Climate Change. So basically, it's a collaboration of institutional investors, right, in 11 Asian markets, and it's focused on climate impact finance. So the funds under the group, under the management of the group, is over 32 billion US dollars. Please bring your perspective. What capacities we need?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So as the moderator sort of mentioned, I work with the Asia Investor Group on climate change. It's an initiative to bring climate-related concerns before the financial community. So we work with over 70 institutional investors, so including both asset owners and asset managers that operate in Asia. And we're looking at both international and domestic investors, and they manage over 32 trillion USD in assets. So what are the fundamental things that we sort of do with our members that are investors is capacity building, right? And I think the difference in the way that we sort of approach this, I think a lot of what I wanted to cover has been covered by Dr. Marjan and all of our panelists. I think all of these points are really important. I just maybe will highlight some of the gaps in maybe what was discussed so far. So I think climate as a topic is very challenging. It cannot be looked at with a single lens or even a double lens. There are so many different problems that are associated with climate and so many different factors that you need to sort of consider. So one of the ways that we approach capacity building for the financial institutions on climate is to look at it both in terms of themes and markets. So I think climate, you can sort of look at it in terms of emissions, but there are also other concerns like nature, the impact on people. When you look at, okay. So when you look at things like transition, the impact that it has on jobs and the economy is also a matter that investors need to sort of be considerate about. So just last year at COP27, there was a high-level expert group report on net zero targets by non-state entities that was put out by this commission. And I think that report is really useful to sort of help different institutions that have set sort of net zero targets or any sort of targets related to climate to really think about what they need to do. And especially when you sort of look at that chapter on just transition, it is quite incumbent on any institution that's engaging in a market to understand the market nuances within which climate-related aspects operate before you sort of mandate what needs to happen in that market. So there is a lot of capacity that needs to be built on the issues of climate, like I mentioned, but then also in terms of how that applies to different markets. I think fundamentally, when you look at how climate has sort of evolved in terms of conversations, it's been sort of examined from different markets. But when you look at broadly Asia, you're sort of looking at what are the Asian-related concerns regarding transition, and how do you sort of develop frameworks around that. So I think there needs to be a fundamental shift in sort of looking at some of these issues from a more market-level perspective, which is what we're trying to do. I think the issue of transparency and credibility, especially in the finance sector, is something that's become, much more incumbent, and there's a lot that needs to be done to build this sort of credibility. So there are a lot of, service providers, there are, rating agencies that are trying to sort of make this process easier. But again, how does the issue of transparency and credibility come in? Like, regulators are stepping in to actually regulate how, rating agencies are operating and what sort of metrics they're using to sort of assess how companies are progressing and how that will affect the finance sector as well. But I think as you realize how complicated these conversations are around climate, investors are sort of stepping up to develop their own tools to do their own assessments of what needs to happen in these different markets. And the only way that these conversations, I think, can progress is, like many of my panelists, my co-panelists, and all of the welcome remarks also sort of mentioned, is through more collaboration. The only way that you're sort of going to be able to understand markets enough to form a credible strategy that will guide your investments is through more collaboration, through more understanding, and working together to identify what pathways are required for different markets, and how do you do it, and how do you sort of bring in finance at different stages. So at AIGCC, one of the fundamental things that we do is sort of adopt these different approaches on understanding the different themes that will sort of flow into the climate conversation, but also how does it apply to different markets. So we do quite a bit of work across different markets in Asia, such as a lot of the ASEAN countries, Japan, China, Korea, and we're keen to sort of do more and collaborate more as these conversations progress.
Thank you very much for your insights. I think we're running out of time, so I will just do this. Maybe I'll ask you one question each, but I would like to ask you to keep to 2 minutes your answers, yeah? Can we do that? So, great. First one, Nishant, is to you. So you're coming from private sector, and the thing is, we want to understand anyway, what real action private sector can do, right, to build the capacity. And just want you to bring the example, on the way to this pavilion this morning, I stopped at the Korean pavilion. And I was happy to see the boost for POSCO company, so it's a steel-making company of Korea. And I was lucky enough 10 years ago to do my degree in Korea, and my studies was funded by this company, actually. And today I see that they are not only in steel-making, they are in the hydrogen business, so they are growing and all that. So we can see kind of the collaboration, right, of the private sector with the public. And in fact, the private sector is in need in that workforce, right? Because you'll be using this workforce to make the change happen. So you need the people, skilled people. So can you just put in 2 minutes, like what activities can be done by the private sector, to make the, capacity built so you have that workforce in place?
See, what is essential is that the main driving force I would look at is competitiveness. For driving competitiveness, you look at scale and size. And when you have the right scale and sizes, that's when you need the skill sets in a large number of people to really support that growth. So whilst we look at this, different initiatives can be taken by the private sector, where the private sector is investing in technology, and technology is enabling people for developing multiple skill sets, multi-skilling of people parallelly. And whilst doing so, they are getting open markets to really scale up and enhance the growth, because I always feel that sustainability leads to scalability. And if we are able to ensure and see that sustainability is profitable, then private sector and public-private partnerships can really be the way to proceed further and as we transform. And that's where different initiatives, as you mentioned, hydrogen. So green fuels, because green fuels, whether it's hydrogen or it's electric backed by renewable energy, amongst many others, along with biofuels and circular economy, also lead to energy security for different countries. So when we look at energy security, that also gives an opportunity for different countries to use their foreign exchange in deploying into different technologies and areas, supporting the private sector, doing public-private partnerships, and growing businesses. And that's what we at JBM also always try and see is that how in each business we can make it scalable, how are we across deploying solutions across the globe, and how we are having an approach of think global, act local. So every single region and country is getting those solutions, and we are able to see that technology, scale, size, clubbed with the whole local solution is giving and leading to competitiveness. And that competitiveness is giving an edge to the local economies to really drive growth and move ahead as we go along with a lot of collaboration and focus on green funding. And green funding being easily available and at scale and size is, I think, what would drive tremendous movement in this direction, where multiple countries like India and many other countries would be at the forefront of such opportunities to collaborate with the global economies.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Azreen, question to you then. So there are like a lot of efforts, right, done to make sure that we have necessary finance to, make the transition happen, but still we're short of climate finance. So from your point of view, what capacities do we need to build to make sure that we have the climate finance? You mentioned several programs you're running in Malaysia, in the region, but what is next? So what should be done?
First of all, I think we need to realize and understand that for transition, it's not one size fits all. While at the country level, we might have national policies on transition, but at each industrial sector, at each company level, transition plan is unique. Malaysia, for example, we just released our energy transition roadmap just a couple of months ago. And in order to realize the transition pathway to 2050, we need billions of dollars to realize this ambition. But that at the macro level. But when it comes down to the company level, this is where each company, they will need to look into what needs to happen for them to transition. And for them to realize that, for them to really understand and set their transition pathway, they need the right set of data. And this is important because once they have the right set of data, then they're able to identify, to monitor, as well as to track their progress towards their transition pathway. This is where we are actively working with our relevant partners to teach companies, whether PLCs as well as the SMEs, on how to start measuring their GHG emission, how to do so, what sorts of tools that they need in order for them to do so. And second part is in terms of the need for comparable and consistent sustainability information. I think Dr. Majun mentioned about the ISSB. This is an area that we are looking at in Malaysia. So we just establish a task force that looks into the implementation of ISSB standards in Malaysia, as well as the readiness of the preparers and the assurance providers. So the importance of having comparable and consistent sustainability data is also important, so that from there, with this data set that we have in terms of GHG emission, data sets in terms of the sustainability information, so all this will be important so that the financial sector can then structure the right finance products in order for companies to meet their transition goals. The other point I wanted to mention is about the need for greater mobilization of blended finance. So while there are some projects that are considered as low-hanging fruit, as they can get private financing quite easily, RE, for example, especially those proven technologies, they're able to tap into the capital market. But with regards to new technologies, this is an area where we need blended financing the most. The participation of MDBs, the International Finance Corporation, for example, this would be helpful in terms of coming at a stage where the project needs at-risk capital, where the projects are not yet ready to be commercialized. Funding in the forms of grants, for example, this would be really helpful for some of these projects. This is an area that we are actively facilitating as well. Just a couple of months ago, we had a roundtable with the IFC, comprising with Malaysian stakeholders such as the policymakers from the energy sectors, the financial sector players, as well as the energy sector players, looking at what can be done in terms of financing energy transition in Malaysia. What sort of financial mechanism is needed, as well as exploring blended finance to finance Malaysia's energy transition. Moving forward, we will continue to engage with the relevant parties to explore this topic further, and from there to also identify if there's any pilot projects that we can work on together in order to mobilize climate finance. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your insights. And Maher, one question to you here. So you are in diversified business, and so from the standpoint of hard-to-abate sectors, what do you think, how to make sure that we have that right mindset in those sectors of economy? In my case, I'm coming from the country which is heavily relies on fossil fuels, so we have a lot of companies out there which are still not realizing, let's say, where we're standing right now. And I'm sure UAE might have similar experience, right? So how to make sure that those companies understand that, have that mindset, and they start acting?
Sure.
So what do you think?
Given the 2-minute target you have given, so I'll try to be very, very fast. First of all, the government, as I mentioned earlier, leading the way, whereby all the oil companies, for example, ADNOC is one of the large oil company today producing oil, but it's the only oil company which is the entire operation is from renewable energy. Nobody knows that. That's a fact. So that means they're leading the project, leading the way. Second, again, ADNOC, they actually launched their second carbon capture project just in September, 2 months ago. And this is one of the largest carbon capture globally. There are 3 companies which do carbon capture, one in Switzerland, one in Canada, one in the US in Dallas, and we're the 4th #1, which is on the largest scale. So that's another thing the government is doing it. So on the contrary, despite being a fossil oil company, we're moving very, very fast. Masdar City, that probably some of you heard about, it's been there for about 16 years. They've got about 40 existing projects in renewable energies globally, right? They've actually taught me a bit of geography, which I thought I knew very well because I used to draw the world map. They've actually invested in a few islands in the Pacific Ocean. I've never heard about them. That tells you the reach of Masdar City, how they have been collaborating with other governments. The recent has been the opening, the inauguration of the largest floating solar panel in Indonesia, just this month. Where the CEO of Masdar was there, and our Minister, His Excellency, Dr. Thani Ziyudi, was also present over there. So UAE is leading the way from there. When it comes to company level, what we're trying to do is, again, raising awareness, because we're diverse in nationalities, mimic the nationality that we have in the UAE. And it's what I keep on saying to the people, look, your knowledge is your treasure. Practice is the key to the treasure. So you need to practice, keep on saying it, because transitioning to the green economy is not going to be a switch on such a button. You have to actually keep on chanting about it till people get bored. I sit on the camp where I don't think the planet will explode by 2050 if we don't reduce 1.5. Yeah, I believe we need to get. That doesn't mean we need to be complacent or lethargic. That means we still need to work. We need to make sure that we do the right thing to make it happen and transition very fast. As a company at the Circle Group, we've actually got one full vertical, couple of businesses just in the renewable energy and circular economy. So one of the companies that we have for the past 14, 15 years, where we take certain waste from the food establishment, the fat and oil and grease, we actually put it back into the economy in terms of water for irrigation, brown oils for cosmetics. So you ladies, if you're getting your cosmetic coming from this is the more healthy one, I can assure you. There's no chemical into it, or we use it for soap manufacturing, or the hard stuff which comes out from that waste, we actually convert into fertilizer, so back into the economy. One of the other plants which we're going to be opening this month is how do we take a feedstock of used cooking oil being used by a lot of people and actually convert it into biofuel, where which can blend it and can be used as B40, B100, whatever you want to do. So as a company, this is already ingrained in our DNA. As a country, it's already coming from our faith that we need to take care of the environment, period. So there isn't any political agenda from that perspective. So it's all about continuous talking to your people, putting up the framework, learning what people are doing as best practices, and then cut it to what you think is important for you in this environment. How can you make the change happen? So when people are leading this change in the company, it's easier for it to be implemented, and information dissemination and implementation happens very quickly.
Thank you. You made it in 4 minutes, not 2. But let me turn to Anjali. Just one last question before we wrap up. So still we believe that finance is quite important for the agenda, and we know that that's the scale we need to work at. And the one question to you is about climate risk management. What kind of tools should be out there, to make things happen?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the tools that we've developed for investors, once investors have made commitments to sort of act on climate, we've created an investor climate action plan that sort of tells investors what you need to do once you've made that commitment to sort of act on climate. And so there are 5 pillars of, activity that investors need to prioritize when you start acting on climate. First is alignment of investment. I could sort of go into that, but I don't think I have the time, but I will just sort of cover the main pillars. So investment is, I think, quite obvious. You have to sort of look at where your future investment goes and also sort of evaluate your current investment, see which sort of trajectory it is in line with. You need to look at your engagement. You need to look at your existing portfolio of companies and engage with them to understand what plans are at their level. So we sort of help with some of these engagement programs, such as Climate Action 100+, utilities engagement, to sort of help investors understand company-level performance better. I think policy advocacy is very important for investors to do, because I think in a lot of cases where investors are asking for a higher level of ambition in a lot of markets, if it doesn't align with what the policy is able to provide, there is going to be a mismatch in returns. And that will affect investors' sort of objectives, right? So there needs to be some level of policy advocacy to ensure that investors are able to perform. We're also asking for more governance. I think this is one of the hardest pillars that investors are really battling. I think at a senior management level, you need to be able to be held accountable for what you're committing to, and where does that accountability go back to, and how are you enforcing it? And this needs to translate across the organization. And I think all of this requires a lot of work. Some of these things like disclosure, governance, investment, they will all benefit from more capacity building being done at the company level, but then also at the regulator level to really understand what investors need to be able to perform in that market, to be able to understand companies better. So I think that it is really a whole ecosystem shift that is required in terms of capacity building. There are plenty of useful frameworks that's out there to sort of help understand what each player is trying to do. But I think really right now it's time to move. I think this conversation on capacity building is the most important one, I think, overall, that's sort of like happening. I think everyone really needs to understand what the different players need to be able to move faster, because I think that's the real issue, right? We need to be able to move fast, and the only way we're able to move fast is to understand what everyone else needs and bring everyone into the movement together. So I think this conversation was really great, and was really interesting to sort of hear everyone's efforts on this. Yeah.
On something very, very important she's mentioned, and I've not mentioned it. I was in the panel discussion last week in Central Bank. Apart from all the 5 pillars that we talked about, accountability and taking people into task are very, very critical. If you don't do that, trust me, your greenwashing and greenwashing and God knows what green things will come up in the future going to explode. So if you don't hold people accountable and take them to task, this is not going to stop. Thank you for bringing that.
I think that's the brilliant end of our session. Thank you very much. I think you got a lot of insights. I would just not spend time, on collecting all of them, but we understand the collaboration, we understand the digital approach, we understand the data's importance, a lot of things. And we hope still have time after the session, to have some chats. And for now, I would like to thank all my panelists, and excuse me for being sometimes bad policy guy, but I was instructed by Cheng Lin, we need to keep to time, we still have speakers to join the stage here. So thank you very much, and please, Cheng Lin, floor is yours.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Aigu, for your very excellent moderation and also the very excellent points made by our distinguished guests and panelists. So actually, we will be slightly late for a few minutes, as we started late, about 15 minutes. So without further ado, I think we heard a lot about, especially what the panelists said. We need to mobilize each of the different types of stakeholders and players and make sure they actually are making the right actions. And we heard about the regulators, we heard about the association, and also real sector. And now let's welcome Mr. Kamran, who is the head of ESG for Asia Pacific from Deutsche Bank, who is supposed to be speaking in the earlier session, but actually due to the very long security line, now let's welcome him to deliver his speech. Mr. Kamran.
First of all, thank you for the invite, New Development Bank and IFS. It's a great conversation. I think a lot of the detailed topics that have been talked about are all very relevant. I want to focus on a few things that might be sort of on the edge a little bit. But I think these COP meetings, I come to every one of them, and I hear the same talking points, and I think we just need to start to distinguish. So when we talk about capacity building, particularly in emerging markets, it is very important to have an emerging market perspective on what sustainability should look like on the ground. This is not a copy and paste. So countries like UAE, like China, India, Brazil, it is very important for them to have their own process of thinking through what makes sense and how to adjust the global standards. I think a lot of that is happening, but it probably needs to happen a lot more. So I really thank Majun and a lot of the other colleagues for their leadership in trying to create momentum with this distinction. The second thing that is, I think, important is when we talk about emerging economies, it's not talked about enough that you cannot address the climate challenge and let go of the development needs of the country. So there is an economic growth challenge which hasn't gone away for these developing countries. They still have people who need to get jobs. They still have young people who need to have futures. So this is not an either or. We have to find a formula that manages both of those things. I was just earlier this morning meeting with another very large Asian country on the JET-P program, the Just Energy Transition Program with the government and so on. And we were talking about, look, this is not about one project or 10 projects. This is about transition of an entire economy. And you cannot just look at it simply by looking at emission numbers. You have to look at how you bring the intensity down overall in the economy and so on. So I think the construct, the formula for sustainability in developing countries is actually going to be quite different. And when I walk around here, I feel like people use the same talking points regardless of which country you're talking about. You cannot have the same conversation in Europe about sustainability as you're having in Asia. It's just not logical. But I don't see enough of that distinction being made, and this is why setting up a capacity building group for emerging economies under the leadership of economies like China, for example, that is the biggest green finance market in the world, depending upon who, either one or number two, right? That's a very good setup as it is for trade, as it would be for a number of other things. It should be for sustainability. A lot of the emerging economies can borrow from what has already been done over, 10, 15 years at least. It still needs refinement, but I think we need a different playbook here than what is constantly discussed as if every country is the same. Now, when we come to developing countries, the other significant thing that is not talked about is that when you're talking about developing countries, you're talking largely about small micro enterprises. That's what emerging economy is made up of mostly. And the discussions we hear a lot in these kinds of meetings, including at WEF, are more relevant for multinational corporations. So when we think about capacity building, what we're really talking about is creating consolidated, scaled platform that small companies can utilize without running into, unmanageable transaction cost. To become sustainable for a small micro enterprise is a massive challenge. It's not about telling them what they need to do and who they need to hire and how to measure emissions. It's also about providing a platform for the country where each small company can go and take advantage of that. Let me give you an example. In this digital world, we have actually figured this out in many other aspects. So if you look at a small company and you look at how they do payroll, right? How they pay their employees. It's very unlikely that they would have 2-3 payroll specialists sitting inside the company. They've usually outsourced that to a third party that does it for thousands of companies and has the system in place. There's no reason why environmental sustainability data cannot be outsourced like that. The measurement, monitoring, reporting, and it'll also be digital, it'll be also standardized. So when we talk about emerging economies and sustainability, that's what we should be really talking about. We can't talk about the big, huge, pie in the sky concepts that really don't go anywhere beyond just the talking point. And then last bit, we talked a lot about financing. Again, when you come to, I do I don't even know how many billions of dollars of sustainable financing in a month, sometimes in a week. Most of it is for multinational corporations. But what I'm telling you is that when you try to do financing for sustainability in an emerging economy, it is not business as usual. It requires innovation. It requires institutional change. It requires different risk-taking appetite, and it requires very different structuring. So also not transferable. It is going to be very customized and unique for these kinds of economies, and we just need to start talking about these things and working on them instead of just assuming that whatever else is happening around the world would somehow solve the problem in emerging markets, because I don't see it happening. And I see that a lot of emerging markets could find themselves left behind, particularly when it comes to international trade. So you will start to see very quickly barriers coming up around the world where people say, well, we will not import anything that is not certified sustainable. And if an emerging economy doesn't have the wherewithal, the capacity to actually produce things that meet those definitions, they're going to be in trouble. And then we will have a whole another generation of haves and have-nots in terms of global economy. We can't let that happen again. It already happened with economic growth over the last several decades. We cannot let that happen with respect to sustainable growth in the years to come. So anyway, thank you very much. I hope this was useful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cameron, for your very impressive speech as well. I'm very impressed by your words about not copy and paste, either the solutions or the capacity building itself. And the points I think we heard in many cases are very identical, similar, sometimes identical. That's exactly what we need to do. So the last speaker we have actually is Mr. Nolan, Stephen Nolan, who is the managing director and head of the secretariat of the FC4S of UNDP. I think they are working on capacity building talent development as well, where I think Aigu also referred to some of the numbers they have. So they are just, I think, launched or are going to launch a new report on that. I very much looking forward to that. So Mr. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Now, good morning, Dr. Ma. I remember a few years ago, the Irish Deputy Ambassador in New York had to give a speech to the New York Police Department Pension Fund. And as he was stepping up to make his remarks, the policeman said to him, "You're between us and our dinner, and we all carry guns." And so I'm the last speaker. I don't want to get in the way. I know he's got a very busy day. So if I may, just very quickly, and as I came in there late because I'm on a different panel, and it was very interesting to hear your remarks, sir, just about that, what I call the interoperability issue. Capital is global. We have different taxonomies. I'm showing my age now, but I was a former Irish government advisor on the mobile technology space. When you remember your mobile phone battery would last for a week. All it was is calling and SMSing, and the most sophisticated game was Tetris. But if you went on holiday, say from Ireland where I was to France, the roaming charges would nearly be the same price as your holiday. And so we were able to get over on top of that, and now we're all in Dubai here, and it's seamless international connectivity. And that's again going back to capital and sustainability, and that there should be no barriers around that interoperability. And then the second thing, again, based in Ireland, but as a European, the European economy is based on SMEs. It's the lifeblood, as are most regions. And if we can't bank, if we can't finance SMEs, if we can't build their capacity to disclose, well, where regulation is going right now, we will be closing them off to finance in years to come. And imagine we're seeing the rise of far right across the world right now. Imagine that as a cause. You're not supporting SMEs, elitism, climate, and we don't need to see that. My third point, if I may, and just for a moment at the risk of embarrassing him, it's always great to be in the company of Dr. Majun. I think it's fair to say he's the godfather of green finance, before most of us were talking about it. And I was just on a previous panel and we were talking about the different policy and regulatory actions that have happened in the last few years. The NGFS, look how fast and how big it's grown. The FSB, what they're doing, transition finance, IOSCO, the Sustainable Insurance Forum that I oversee, the International Platform for Sustainable Finance, and then of course the G20 Task Force Transition Finance Framework, you as the previous co-chair of the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group. So it's great to be here with you as well, sir, just discussing this topic. From a UNDP perspective, 41 financial centres, we go live with this report tomorrow. It does kind of identify some of the existing challenges, or the challenges that still exist. To your point, they haven't changed that much in the last few years, but we are getting better at them. Obviously, data quality and availability, development of standards and guidelines, people are calling for this. Policy and regulatory conversions at a global level. We're now not just around the environment or climate, it's about biodiversity, it's about just, and will we see a conversions around those different topics in the next few years? Pipeline. I'm thrilled you're doing billions a week. In other jurisdictions, people are struggling to find pipeline to actually invest in this area. Innovation, a very much abused word, but the innovation of new products and services. I mentioned the word biodiversity earlier on, but the key one again is talent development, or a lack of. There is a war for talent going on right now in the whole area of sustainable finance, and it's not just in the market. It's at policy, regulatory and market level. And so as I close the session today, I must congratulate Shenlun and the colleagues about the new initiative CASI, which goes live later on this week. I was with Mayor Bloomberg earlier on this week, and they've just launched a new global capacity building coalition, which is great to see. And then we as UNDP, providing the secretary to the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, we also are providing the secretary to the new TAP, Technical Assistance Advisory Platform. And then we obviously have Dr. Majun's initiative. So again, what's going to be key there is the interoperability between those different initiatives as well. Because we do have limited resources, we do have limited bandwidth, and we need to make sure that those resources hit well. So Dr. Majun, as always, congratulations. Thank you for bringing us here again today. You're the ultimate convener, and forgive me for missing the earlier elements of the panel, but I think we also need to compliment the UAE government. It's quite a show that's been put on as you walk in here. The hospitality is fantastic, but most importantly, the substance is key. And so thank you very much for including me today, and thank you for including the UNDP. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So that's our last speaker, but actually the voice on capacity building does not stop. And it's not just in the COP. As Stephen just said, on December the 5th afternoon in the AIB Pavilion, actually very close, a 1-minute walk in the AIB Pavilion from 1 to 2 p.m. We're going to formally launch our CASI, Capacity Building Alliance of investment, of sustainable investment. So feel free to join us for that launch event. And also seats are reserved. Actually, we have limited seats. So those who can come earlier can get it earlier. Thank you once again very much for joining us today, and wish you a very good stay here. Thank you very much.